This content is entirely fictional and does not promote violence or organized crime. It reflects the consequences of a criminal lifestyle. The medication bottles stood in formation on Vincent Castellano's mahogany desk like soldiers awaiting orders. Lisinopril for blood pressure, metoprolol for rhythm, aspirin to thin the blood that had flowed through 3 generations of men who lived and died by codes written in shadows. At 58 years old, Vincent had outlived his father by 12 years and his grandfather by 20. In their world, that qualified as immortality. The morning sun cut through the blinds of his private office, striping the Persian rug in bars of gold and darkness. On the wall behind him hung 3 photographs in identical frames. His grandfather in 1945, standing outside the original Castellano social club in the North End, fedora tilted, eyes hard as the cobblestones beneath his feet. His father in 1978, at the christening of Vincent's younger brother, both hands resting on the baby's head like a pope bestowing benediction. And Vincent himself, taken 20 years ago on the day he became boss, younger then, still believing that power and wisdom were the same thing. He had learned differently. The intercom on his desk crackled to life. The voice that emerged belonged to Frank DeLuca, his consigliere, his advisor, his oldest friend, the only man in Boston who could walk into Vincent's office without knocking and live to tell about it. "Doctor's here," the voice said. Vincent pressed the button. "Send him in." Dr. Raymond Chen entered carrying a leather medical bag that had probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Vincent paid him a retainer that guaranteed 2 things: availability at any hour and absolute silence. Chen had been treating Vincent for 3 years, ever since the first time Vincent's heart had forgotten how to beat properly, and he'd woken on his bathroom floor with his face pressed against cold marble, tasting copper and defeat. The examination took 12 minutes. Blood pressure cuff. Stethoscope moving across his chest like a divining rod searching for life. The portable EKG machine that spat out a ribbon of paper covered in peaks and valleys that looked like a seismograph recording an earthquake in slow motion. Chen removed his stethoscope and sat back, his expression carefully neutral in the way doctors learn when they have bad news that cannot be softened. "Your ejection fraction is 25%, Chen said. "Normal is 60. Your heart is functioning at less than half capacity." Vincent had survived 40 years in a profession where men disappeared for asking the wrong questions. He knew how to hear what wasn't being said. "How long?" Vincent asked. Chen folded his hands. 2 years if you retire completely. Eliminate all stress. Move to Arizona. Take up golf. 6 months, maybe less, if you maintain your current lifestyle." Vincent smiled without humor. "Retirement isn't an option in my profession." "It is, if you want to meet your grandchildren." "I have a grandchild, Danny, 12 years old, smart kid." "Then he deserves a grandfather who's alive to see him graduate high school." Vincent looked at the photographs on his wall. None of those men had retired. His grandfather died of a heart attack at 46, slumped over his dinner plate with tomato sauce on his chin. His father took 3 bullets in a restaurant parking lot at 38, his blood mixing with motor oil and rain. Vincent had always assumed he'd go the same way, sudden and violent, a period at the end of a sentence written in the language of his world. The idea of slow decay, of fading away in some sun-baked retirement community while his heart forgot how to pump, seemed like a failure of imagination. "I'll think about it," Vincent said. Chen stood. "Think fast. Your next heart attack will probably be your last." After the doctor left, Vincent sat alone in his office and did something he rarely permitted himself. He thought about the weight of the crown he wore, invisible to everyone except the men who served him and the men who wanted him dead. At 8 in the morning, Vincent Castellano convened the weekly meeting that kept his world spinning on its axis. The room was in the back of Salvator's restaurant, a North End establishment that had been serving osso buco and making book for 50 years. The walls were thick. The doors were heavy. The waiters knew not to hear anything, which was different from not hearing, a distinction that kept them employed and breathing. 8 men sat around the table, each representing a crew, a territory, a revenue stream that flowed upward like tributaries feeding a river. They were captains, capos, men who commanded soldiers and settled disputes and collected the tributes that kept the family fed. Their ages ranged from 42 to 68. Some wore suits. Some wore track suits. All wore the same expression of careful attention. Vincent stood at the head of the table. He did not sit during these meetings. Sitting implied equality, and there was no equality in this room, only hierarchy, only the understanding that one man gave orders and 8 men executed them or found themselves executed. "We're transitioning," Vincent said. His voice carried the rough texture of a lifetime of cigarettes, now quit, and late nights, not yet abandoned. 5-year plan. By 2030, this family operates entirely legitimate businesses. Clean money, legal enterprises. Our children inherit something they don't have to be ashamed of. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes storms. An older capo named Jimmy Torino spoke first. He'd been with Vincent's father, had helped Vincent consolidate power when he was young, and the other families saw opportunity in his youth. "About time," Jimmy said. "I'm 66 years old. I'd like to die in my bed instead of the trunk of somebody's Cadillac." But the younger capos exchanged glances. Vincent saw the calculation in their eyes, the arithmetic of ambition. They had families to feed, soldiers to pay, lifestyles built on cash that flowed like water as long as the spigot stayed open. Sal Marino, Vincent's underboss, leaned back in his chair. He was 45, handsome in the way certain predators are handsome, groomed, and dangerous. "Legitimate means less profit," Sal said. "The soldiers won't like that." Vincent let the words hang in the air for 3 seconds. Then, "The soldiers will do what they're told. This family survives. That's the only mandate." "And if they don't want to survive your way?" Sal asked. His tone was respectful, but Vincent heard the challenge underneath, like a knife wrapped in silk. "Then they leave," Vincent said, "or they're removed. I'm not asking, Sal, I'm telling." After the meeting, Frank DeLuca pulled Vincent aside in the hallway that smelled of garlic and oregano, and 50 years of conversations that would send men to prison. "Sal's not wrong," Frank said quietly. "You're asking wolves to become dogs. Some won't." Vincent looked at his oldest friend. Frank was 55, mostly bald, with the face of a man who'd seen too much and forgotten nothing. They'd grown up 3 blocks apart, stolen their first car together at 14, buried their fathers in the same year. "Then they leave or they're removed," Vincent repeated. "And if they remove you first?" Frank asked. Vincent smiled. "Then I train my successors poorly." That afternoon, Vincent drove to Cambridge, crossing the river that separated his world from the world where people paid taxes and believed in the rule of law. His son Michael lived in a brownstone near Harvard Square, a neighborhood where the most dangerous thing was an argument about parking spaces. Michael Castellano was 35 years old, Harvard Law, assistant district attorney for Suffolk County, and the walking embodiment of everything Vincent had tried to build with his blood money. Smart, clean, legitimate, a man who prosecuted criminals instead of commanding them. They had dinner once a month, these 2 men connected by blood and separated by every choice that mattered. Vincent rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass, he saw movement, heard footsteps, and then Michael opened the door. He had his mother's eyes, green and sharp, and his father's jawline, which he probably resented. Dad, Michael said. Not quite warmth, not quite cold. The temperature of obligation. Inside, the house smelled like something Italian was cooking, probably Sarah's doing. Michael had married well, a school teacher named Sarah who came from a family where the worst crime anyone had committed was a parking ticket. Their son Danny was doing homework at the kitchen table, 12 years old, dark hair falling across his forehead as he frowned at a math problem. When Danny saw Vincent, his face transformed. No, he shouted and launched himself across the room. Vincent caught him, felt the boy's thin arms around his neck, and experienced what passed for joy in his circumscribed life. Hey, Danny boy, he said, you getting taller or am I getting shorter? Both, Danny said seriously. They ate dinner together, the four of them, and for 90 minutes Vincent pretended he was just a grandfather, just a father, just a man who'd made his money in some vague business that nobody talked about. Sarah served chicken cacciatore. Danny talked about his soccer team. Michael mostly listened, contributing the occasional comment, watching his father with the careful attention of a prosecutor building a case. After dinner, Danny challenged Vincent to chess. They set up the board in the living room while Michael and Sarah cleaned up in the kitchen, their low voices carrying but not their words. Vincent moved his king's pawn forward 2 spaces. Danny mirrored the move. Remember, Vincent said, every piece has a role, even pawns. Protect them when you can. But you have to sacrifice pawns to win, Danny said. Only when there's no other move. A good king never sacrifices unnecessarily. Danny considered this, then moved his knight. Is that why you're a businessman, Nano? Because you're good at protecting people? Vincent studied the board, aware that Michael had appeared in the doorway, listening. Something like that, Vincent said. After Danny went to bed, Vincent and Michael stood on the front porch. The Cambridge streets were quiet, lit by street lamps that seemed inadequate against the October darkness. 2 blocks away, a dog barked. Somewhere a car alarm chirped twice and fell silent. I heard about your case, Vincent said. Marino. Michael's shoulders tensed. I can't discuss ongoing prosecution with you. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you to be careful. Sal has friends. Friends like you, Michael asked. His voice was flat, prosecutorial. I'm his boss, not his friend. There's a difference. You're still complicit. Every day you run that family, you're complicit in everything they do. Vincent could have argued, could have explained the codes and obligations that governed his world, the debts that bound men tighter than blood. But his son had chosen a different world, one with different rules, and Vincent respected that even as it created a chasm between them that no amount of Sunday dinners could bridge. Every day, Vincent agreed, but I'm trying to leave you something clean. That's why I'm changing things. You can't clean blood with money, Dad. Maybe not, but I can try to stop more from spilling. Michael looked at his father in the inadequate light. When I was a kid, I used to lie awake at night wondering if you were coming home, if some other family had decided you were a problem that needed solving. You know what that does to a child. Vincent had no answer that would satisfy. He knew what his choices had cost, was still counting that cost in the distance between them. I'm sorry, Vincent said, and meant it in a way he rarely meant anything. Michael shook his head. Sorry doesn't change what you are, what you've done. No, Vincent agreed. It doesn't. His son went inside without another word, and Vincent stood alone on the porch, feeling the weight of his crown and the weakness in his chest, where his heart labored against the mathematics of decay. 3 days later, in a warehouse in South Boston that smelled of rust and low tide, 2 men who should not have been meeting sat across from each other at a metal table. Salvatore Marino, underboss of the Castellano family, arrived first. He wore a leather jacket and the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're smarter than the man you serve. Anthony Russo arrived 10 minutes later. He was 62, boss of a smaller family based in Providence, and dying of lung cancer that he refused to acknowledge even as it carved him hollow from the inside. He'd known Vincent since they were both young, had competed with him for the same promotion when Vincent's father was still alive. Vincent had won that competition. Tony had never forgiven him. They sat without shaking hands. "Your boss is getting soft," Tony said. His voice was hoarse from the tumor eating his throat. "Legitimacy is death." Sal leaned forward. "He's sick. Heart, maybe a year left." "So accelerate the timeline." "His son won't step in. Kid's a prosecutor." "Then we force him. Give him a reason to need the family." Tony laid out the plan with the casual precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. Kidnap the grandson. Hold him for 72 hours. Demand Vincent step down as boss. Install Sal as the new Don. When the son realizes the only protection his child has comes from the family he despises, he'll cooperate. Vincent either accepts retirement or goes to war, which will kill him faster than any disease. Sal listened, calculating, and after Vincent's gone. "After Vincent's gone," Tony said, "we carve up his territory like a Thanksgiving turkey. You get North End. I get the ports. Everybody wins except the old man who thought he could walk away clean." "What about the boy?" Sal asked. "What about him?" "After we get what we want, what happens to him?" Tony smiled. "He's 12 years old. He'll forget this ever happened. Kids are resilient." Sal nodded slowly. "When?" "Saturday, soccer practice. Mother brings him every week, same field. We take him clean, no fuss. Vincent gets the call. Clock starts ticking." "And if he doesn't step down?" Tony shrugged. "Then the old lion learns that some hunts end badly." They shook hands, these two men planning betrayal, and left separately into the October afternoon. 3 blocks away, in a Honda Civic with tinted windows, a low-level soldier named Jimmy Bones sat with a camera and a sense of loyalty that ran deeper than money. He'd served under Vincent's father, had taken a bullet for Vincent 15 years ago in a dispute over territory that should have ended with Vincent dead on a sidewalk. Jimmy Bones photographed everything. 2 days later, Vincent sat in his office reviewing the photographs Frank had delivered that morning. Sal Marino and Tony Russo, heads together, shaking hands. The timestamp showed Wednesday afternoon, when Sal had told Vincent he was meeting with a union rep about a construction contract. Frank stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "This is bad. Sal's your underboss. If he flips, half the family might follow." "Do we have proof of active betrayal?" Vincent asked. "Meeting with a rival boss is proof enough in our world." Vincent set the photos down. "But not in the world I'm trying to build. I need certainty before I act." Frank turned from the window. The old Vincent would have acted on suspicion. "The old Vincent," Vincent said quietly, "created the problems I'm trying to solve." Wednesday afternoon, October 16th. Beacon Hill Soccer Field, 3:30 in the afternoon. Sarah Castellano sat in her Volvo wagon grading papers while her son played in a league game that didn't matter, except to the 12-year-old boys who treated it like the World Cup. She'd been a high school English teacher for 8 years, and she still brought work everywhere, stealing minutes between the margins of her other life. Danny played midfield, not the best on the team but trying hard, which Sarah valued more than natural talent. She watched him chase the ball, his dark hair flying, and felt the ordinary happiness of a parent watching a child do something they love. She didn't see the black van pull into the parking lot. She didn't notice the 4 men who emerged, moving with practiced efficiency. She noticed when her driver's side window exploded inward in a shower of safety glass, and 50,000 volts from a taser turned her muscles to water and her vision to static. The last thing Sarah saw before unconsciousness was her son's face, Danny turning toward the parking lot, toward the sound of breaking glass, his expression shifting from confusion to terror as two men grabbed him, lifted him, carried him toward the van like he weighed nothing at all. 90 seconds from breaking glass to acceleration. The van disappeared into Boston traffic, anonymous and untraceable. Another parent found Sarah 8 minutes later, slumped across the front seat, coming back to consciousness with the slow horror of understanding. Her phone had fallen to the floor. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to dial. She called Michael first, then 911, in that order, which told you everything about who she trusted to actually help. Michael Castellano was in a meeting with 2 other prosecutors when his cell phone rang. He almost didn't answer, but something about the timing, the persistence of the ring, made him excuse himself and step into the hallway. Sarah's voice came through fractured with static and terror. "They took him," she said. "Michael, they took Danny." The hallway tilted. "Who?" "I don't know, 4 men. They tasered me. I couldn't move. I couldn't stop them." "Where are you?" "Soccer field. Ambulance is coming. Michael, they took our son." "I'm coming," he said. "Don't talk to anyone until I get there." He hung up and stood in the hallway of the Suffolk County District Attorney's office. Surrounded by the machinery of justice he'd spent his adult life serving, and understood with perfect clarity that none of it would help him now. There was only one person who could help. He dialed a number he'd programmed under the name, Dad, even though he rarely used it for anything except obligatory holiday calls. Vincent answered on the first ring. "Michael," his father said. "What's wrong?" "They took Danny." Vincent's voice changed, became something harder and colder. "Where are you?" "Sarah's at Beacon Hill Field. They grabbed him at soccer practice." "I'm coming. Don't talk to anyone until I get there." "Dad, we need to call the FBI." "No," Vincent said. "The word was absolute. Not yet. Trust me." Michael wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the FBI had resources and procedures and experience with kidnappings. But some older instinct, something from childhood, made him say okay instead. He trusted his father in a way he'd spent 15 years trying not to trust him. Vincent arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital 40 minutes later with Frank DeLuca and 2 men who looked like they settled problems that couldn't be solved with conversations. The emergency room security guard saw them coming and decided he had urgent business in the break room. Sarah sat in a curtained bay, a bandage on her forehead where she'd hit the steering wheel, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. When she saw Vincent, something in her face crumpled and reformed, like she was deciding whether to scream at him or collapse into his arms. She did neither, just looked at him with eyes that blamed him for everything. Michael stood beside his wife. "Tell me everything," Vincent said. Michael recited the facts with prosecutor precision. Time of attack, description of the van, number of assailants, Sarah's injuries. Vincent listened without interruption, processing, cataloging, building a tactical picture in his mind. "This wasn't random," Vincent said. "No shit," Michael said, his voice cracked. "This is your world, your enemies. My son is paying for your sins." Vincent accepted the accusation without defense. "You're right, and I'll fix it." "How? By killing people. That's your solution to everything." Vincent looked at his son and saw terror and rage and helplessness, saw himself 30 years ago when the world had taken something from him and taught him that grief was just another form of fuel. "No," Vincent said. by giving them what they want. You're going to retire. I'm going to appear to retire, and then I'm going to find who did this and make them regret it. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. The screen filled with Danny's face, pale and scared but unmarked. Behind him, a concrete wall, basement somewhere. The video was grainy but clear enough. A voice spoke, electronically distorted. Vincent Castellano, you're getting old. Time to retire. Vincent stepped closer to the phone. Who is this? Someone who remembers when bosses died with honor, not in hospital beds. The voice laid out terms. Vincent steps down as boss of the Castellano family, publicly announces retirement, endorses Sal Marino as his successor, 48 hours to comply. Or what, Vincent asked. Or your grandson learns that some debts get paid in blood. The screen went dark. Michael looked at his father. This is Sal, your underboss. Vincent nodded slowly. He's the only one who benefits. Then let's tell the FBI. Let them handle it. FBI takes weeks. Danny has 48 hours. So what do we do? Vincent pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in 6 months. We do what we always do. We make them think they won, and then we take back what's ours. Before Michael could ask what that meant, the emergency room doors opened, and Special Agent Julia Reeves walked in like she owned every room she entered. She was 44, FBI Organized Crime Task Force, and she'd been building a case against the Castellano family for 3 years. Mr. Castellano, she said, interesting that the grandson of a district attorney gets kidnapped, almost like targeted retaliation. Vincent met her gaze, almost like you should be finding him instead of talking to me. We both know this is underworld business. You know who did this. If I did, they'd already be dead. Reeves stepped closer. Work with me. I can protect your grandson and finally take down the people who have run this city for 50 years. My grandson isn't bait for your career, Agent. Get out. She held his stare for 5 seconds, then turned and left without another word. Vincent watched her go, then turned to Michael and Sarah. Go home, try to rest. I'll handle this. How, Michael asked. Frank will explain everything. Right now, I need to make some calls. He walked out of the hospital and stood in the parking garage where the October wind cut through his suit jacket and made his chest ache. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Tony Russ answered on the 3rd ring. Vincent, Tony said, how's retirement planning going? Vincent closed his eyes. You made a mistake, Tony. Did I? Taking a child, that breaks the code. There is no code anymore, Vinny. You broke it when you decided to go legitimate. Real bosses don't retire. They die in the job. Then I guess we'll see which kind I am. Vincent hung up and stood in the parking garage, alone except for rows of cars that belonged to people with normal problems, and made a decision. He walked back inside and found the hospital chapel, a small room with 6 pews and a cross that seemed inadequate for the weight of prayer it was expected to carry. Vincent sat in the back row. He hadn't prayed since his father's funeral, didn't believe in much except the transactional nature of the universe, but he spoke anyway into the silence. Pop, he said quietly, you told me the crown was the heaviest burden. I'm feeling that weight now. The chapel offered no response. I tried to do it your way. Honor, loyalty, code. But they took my blood, they took Danny. The silence continued, which Vincent accepted. Dead men offered no counsel. I don't know if I can be the man I'm trying to become, or if I need to be the man I was. He sat there for 10 more minutes, waiting for something that didn't come, then stood and walked out. In the parking garage, Frank was waiting by Vincent's car. "What's the play?" Frank asked. Vincent unlocked the doors. "Tomorrow I call a commission meeting. I'm stepping down, endorsing Sal." "You're actually doing it." "No," Vincent said. "I'm making them think I'm doing it. Then we see who shows their hand." "That's dangerous." "Danny's in a basement somewhere, scared and alone because of choices I made. I don't care about dangerous anymore." They drove back to the North End through streets Vincent had controlled for 20 years, past restaurants that paid tribute and businesses that operated under his protection, and men who would kill for him if he asked. But none of that power could protect one 12-year-old boy, which meant the power was illusion, currency that only held value as long as everyone agreed to pretend it was real. Vincent had spent his life accumulating power because it was the only safety he knew. Tonight he understood that power was just another word for the distance between what you could control and what you loved. And sometimes that distance was measured in the space between a soccer field and a basement, between a grandfather's office and a grandson's fear, between the man you were and the man you'd have to become. The night stretched ahead, 48 hours counting down like a heartbeat, and Vincent Castellano sat in his office surrounded by photographs of dead men who'd worn the same crown, and wondered if he'd die trying to save a boy or live long enough to become the kind of grandfather who taught chess instead of strategy, who planted tomatoes instead of fear. His heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, marking time, counting down toward whatever ending this story demanded. Outside, Boston breathed in the October darkness, a city built on old sins and new money, where 3 generations of Castellanos had ruled and bled and disappeared into history. The throne waited. The crown sat heavy. And somewhere in a basement, a 12-year-old boy named Danny waited for his grandfather to do what grandfathers do. Vincent picked up his phone and began making calls, assembling pieces on a board that had been set since the day he took power, since the day his father died, since his grandfather stood outside a social club in 1945 and decided that some men were born to rule and others were born to serve. Tomorrow, he would pretend to surrender. Tonight, he would prepare for war. The game had changed, but the rules remained the same. Protect your blood, honor your debts, and never ever let them see you weak. Vincent Castellano had built an empire on those principles. Now he would burn it down to save one child. Because in the end, the only crown worth wearing was the one a grandson would remember. Everything else was just wait. 36 hours after Danny disappeared, Vincent Castellano walked into a room that smelled of cigars and old money, and the kind of silence that precedes either peace or violence. The commission meeting took place in a private dining room at the Union Oyster House, Boston's oldest restaurant, where the walls had absorbed a century of secrets and learned to keep them. 5 men sat around a table meant for 12. Each represented a family, a territory, a piece of the invisible map that divided New England into kingdoms ruled by men who'd never appear on any ballot. Providence, Hartford, Worcester, Springfield, and Boston, where Vincent had sat at the head for 20 years. Vincent stood. Standing was respect. Sitting would have implied he still belonged. "Gentlemen," he said. His voice carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights and the weight of a decision that would rewrite everything. "I'm stepping down. Health reasons." The silence that followed was the kind you could measure in heartbeats. Carlo Benedetto, who ran Providence and had known Vincent since both men were soldiers, spoke first. "You serious?" "My doctor gives me a year, maybe less. Time to let younger men carry the weight." Tony Russo sat 3 chairs down, trying to hide satisfaction behind concern. Tough break, Vinny. Who's taking over? Vincent turned to look at Sal Marino, who sat against the wall, not yet at the table because underbosses didn't sit with bosses until they became one. I'm endorsing Sal. He's earned it. Sal stood and moved to the empty chair at Vincent's right hand. He wore a suit that cost more than some men's cars and an expression of humility that Vincent recognized as performance. Thank you, boss. I won't let you down. Vincent almost laughed. Sal had already let him down in ways that would require blood to balance the ledger. But this room didn't need to know that yet. The other bosses asked questions about transition, about territories, about whether agreements would be honored. Vincent answered each with the precision of a man who'd spent 4 decades navigating the politics of power. Yes, all deals stand. No, nothing changes operationally. Yes, I'll be available for consultation. He was lying about that last part, but they didn't need to know. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, Vincent walked out of the Union Oyster House and into the October afternoon and felt lighter than he had in years. Not because he'd surrendered power, but because he'd set a trap and baited it with his own crown. Frank was waiting in the car, a black Lincoln Town car that had seen better decades, but refused to admit it. He pulled away from the curb before Vincent had his seatbelt fastened. They bought it, Frank asked. Vincent watched Boston scroll past his window, the city he'd controlled and bled for and would probably die in. Hook, line, and sinker. What now? Now we wait. Sal thinks he won. Tony thinks he won. They'll get sloppy. And when they do, we'll know where Danny is. And if they don't get sloppy? Vincent didn't answer because there was no good answer. The mathematics of kidnapping were simple. Every hour Danny stayed gone, the chances of getting him back alive decreased. Every hour Vincent pretended weakness, the likelihood of someone else making a move increased. He was gambling with his grandson's life, and the house always had better odds than the player. But Vincent had spent 40 years learning how to cheat the house. 20 miles away, in a basement that smelled of mildew and motor oil, Danny Castellano sat on a mattress that had seen better years and worse occupants. His hands weren't tied. His captors had explained, almost apologetically, that this wasn't personal, just business. He'd be home soon as long as certain conditions were met. Danny was 12 years old, but he'd grown up watching his grandfather play chess, learning that every position on the board existed in relationship to every other position. He understood patterns. He understood that men who apologized for kidnapping you were trying to make you comfortable, which meant they planned to keep you alive. That understanding kept the panic at manageable levels. 4 men rotated guard duty in 6-hour shifts. They never used names, never spoke about anything except neutral topics, weather, sports, how the Red Sox were going to disappoint everyone again next season. They brought him food from restaurants, still in takeout containers. Chinese food, pizza, a meatball sub from a place that Danny recognized because his father had taken him there. That detail meant something. These men knew his neighborhood, knew his routines. This wasn't random professionals from out of state. This was local, which meant someone close had betrayed his grandfather. Danny filed that information away the way his nana had taught him. Everything is intelligence. Everything matters. On the second day, one of the guards left a newspaper on the floor. Danny read it front to back, looking for signals, for messages, for anything. He found what he was looking for on page 7 of the Metro section. A small article about a commission meeting at the Union Oyster House, about Vincent Castellano stepping down for health reasons, about Sal Marino being endorsed as the new boss. Danny understood then. This wasn't about ransom. This was about succession. Someone wanted his grandfather's throne badly enough to take a child hostage. He wondered if his nonno knew who. He suspected his nonno knew everything. Michael Castellano had not slept in 36 hours. He sat in his home office surrounded by files from every kidnapping case he'd ever prosecuted, looking for patterns, for precedents, for something that would tell him how to save his son when the FBI had nothing, and his father was playing games Michael didn't understand. Sarah had taken sedatives prescribed by a doctor who'd asked too many questions about stress. She was upstairs in their bedroom, unconscious in the chemical way that wasn't quite sleep, but was better than the alternative. Michael's phone rang, unknown number. He answered before the first ring finished. The screen showed Danny's face again, still pale, still scared, but alive. Michael's chest unclenched slightly. "Counselor," the distorted voice said, "your father made the right choice. Let me talk to my son." The camera shifted. Danny looked directly at Michael with an expression that seemed too calm for a 12-year-old being held in a basement. "Dad," Danny said, "I'm okay. They're treating me fine." Michael wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but settled for one. "Are you hurt?" "No, they gave me pizza, and I've been reading." That detail, incongruous and perfect, almost broke Michael. His son was being held hostage and still thinking about books, reading what Michael asked. Whatever they leave lying around, today's Globe. There was an article about Nano. "Smart kid," the voice said, and the camera shifted back to darkness. "You'll get him back tomorrow. Your father kept his word. We're keeping ours." "When?" "Tomorrow night. Instructions will follow. And counselor, one more thing. Your father just bought your son's life with his empire. Maybe show some gratitude." The call ended. Michael sat in his office and did something he hadn't done since he was 8 years old and didn't understand why his father missed his birthday party. He cried. Not the dignified tears of an adult confronting loss, but the ugly, body-shaking sobs of a man who'd spent 2 days believing he'd failed the most fundamental duty a parent has. When he could breathe again, Michael called his father. Vincent answered immediately. "You heard from them." "Danny's alive. They're releasing him tomorrow night." Vincent exhaled, a sound like air escaping from something that had been holding it too long. "Good." "Dad," Michael's voice cracked, "thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We're not done." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're releasing Danny because they think I'm neutralized. But betrayal doesn't get rewarded. It gets answered." Michael understood what his father wasn't saying, understood the difference between the world of law where he lived and the world of codes where his father had survived for 40 years. "Dad, you can't. The FBI." "The FBI will arrest a lot of people very soon," Vincent said. "But first, I need to know exactly who took my grandson, and I need you to help me." "How?" "Trust me for 24 more hours. Can you do that?" Michael looked at the files spread across his desk, evidence of crimes solved through procedure and patience and the rule of law. Then he thought about his son in a basement, scared and trying to be brave. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." While Michael Castellano wrestled with the compromise of his principles, Frank DeLuca sat in a car 3 blocks from Sal Marino's house in the suburbs, where men like Sal pretended to be legitimate businessmen and their neighbors pretended to believe them. Frank had been surveilling Sal for 36 hours, documenting every visitor, every phone call he could intercept with equipment that was probably illegal but definitely effective. He'd photographed Sal meeting with 3 different captains, all younger, all ambitious, all the kind of men who'd follow strength wherever it led. The family was fracturing, exactly, as Vincent had predicted. But Frank had also photographed something else. Sal meeting with a black SUV in a parking lot behind a closed shopping mall. Money changing hands. A brief conversation where Sal had looked nervous in a way Frank had never seen before. Frank had run the plates on the SUV, registered to a shell company that traced back to an import business in Revere. The import business was owned by a man named Dmitry Volkov, and Dmitry Volkov worked for the Bratva, the Russian organized crime network that had been expanding into Boston for the last 5 years. Vincent had been so focused on Tony Russo's betrayal that he'd missed the larger picture. Sal hadn't just partnered with another Italian family. He'd gone outside the commission entirely. He'd hired Russians to do what his own soldiers might have refused. That was worse than betrayal. That was heresy. Frank called Vincent. "We've got a problem." "Talk to me." Sal outsourced the kidnapping. Russians, Bratva crew out of Revere. Vincent was quiet for 3 seconds. Names. Dmitry Volkov runs an import operation as a front, has a crew of 6, maybe 8, former Spetsnaz, professional grade. Where? Working on it. But Vincent, if Sal brought in Russians, this is bigger than Tony. This is him trying to completely restructure the family. "Find the location," Vincent said. "We're running out of time." Frank hung up and went back to watching Sal's house, waiting for the mistake that would tell him where they were keeping a 12-year-old boy who'd done nothing except have the wrong grandfather. The next afternoon, Agent Julia Reeves sat in her office at the FBI field office in Chelsea, reviewing surveillance photos that had been delivered anonymously to her desk that morning. No note, no return address, just an envelope containing 8 photographs of Sal Marino meeting with known Russian organized crime figures. She recognized Vincent Castellano's tradecraft immediately. He was feeding her intelligence, building a case for her, setting up dominoes so that when they fell, the FBI would be there to make arrests that looked like good police work instead of orchestrated vengeance. Julia had spent 15 years hunting men like Vincent. Her father had been a Boston police detective who died in a shootout connected to Castellano operations 20 years ago. She joined the FBI specifically to take down the families that had run Boston since before she was born. But she also recognized something in Vincent that most of his enemies missed. He kept his word. He followed codes that were outdated and probably immoral, but he followed them consistently. And right now, his code aligned with her duty. She called her supervisor. "I need authorization for a raid. Tomorrow night. Russian crew in Revere, kidnapping charges." "Evidence?" her supervisor asked. "Source protected, but solid, multiple violations. I can get a warrant." "Do it. But Reeves, if this connects back to Castellano, I want him too." Julia looked at the photographs. Understood. "But sir, Castellano's grandson is the victim here. That complicates things." "Everything about this family complicates things. That's why they've lasted 50 years. Julia hung up and began drafting the warrant application, choosing her words carefully, building a legal structure around intelligence she'd obtained from the man she was supposed to be arresting. The law, she'd learned, was sometimes a blunt instrument, but when wielded precisely, it could cut through problems that bullets only made worse. Evening fell over Boston like a curtain dropping on the second act. Vincent sat in his office with Frank and 3 men who'd been with him for decades. Marcus Chen, 55 years old, former Army Ranger before he'd come to work for Vincent's father. Patrick O'Brien, 60, reformed IRA enforcer who'd found redemption in Vincent's employment. Yusuf al-Rashid, 52, Iraqi interpreter Vincent had sponsored for asylum in 2004 after the man had saved his life on a business trip that was definitely not about business. These were not criminals, not anymore. They ran legitimate security companies, owned restaurants, paid taxes. But they owed Vincent debts that transcended statute of limitations, and when he'd called, they'd come. The plan was simple, in the way that all dangerous plans are simple. Dmitry Volkov's crew was holding Danny at an abandoned fish processing plant in Revere Beach. Frank's surveillance had finally pinpointed the location through a combination of phone intercepts and old-fashioned detective work. 8 Russians, professionally trained, heavily armed. Vincent's team would not be going in with guns. That would be a massacre they couldn't win. Instead, they'd cut power to the building, create confusion with smoke grenades, extract Danny in the chaos, and be gone before the Russians understood what happened. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only plan that didn't involve either waiting for the FBI or accepting that Danny's return came at the cost of letting betrayal stand. Marcus studied blueprints of the fish processing plant, entry points here and here, basement access through a loading dock. If the kid's in the basement, we can reach him in under 3 minutes. If he's not in the basement, Patrick said in his Belfast accent that 40 years in America hadn't softened, we're in the middle of a building with 8 trained killers and no backup. Then we better be right about the basement, Vincent said. Yusuf, who'd been quiet, spoke up. Vincent, you're not going in. The room got very still. That's my grandson, Vincent said. Which is why you're not going in. You have a heart condition, you're slow, you'll get someone killed, probably yourself. Vincent wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank, wanted to remind everyone that he was still the boss regardless of what performance he'd given the commission. But Yusuf was right, and Vincent had spent too long valuing truth over ego to start lying now. Fine, Vincent said. Frank goes with you. I coordinate from outside. Frank started to object, but Vincent cut him off. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't turn into a suicide mission. That's you. Bring my grandson home. The meeting ended. The men left to prepare. Vincent sat alone in his office and did something he'd been avoiding for 2 days. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a revolver that had belonged to his father. It was loaded. It was clean. It had last been fired in 1978 when his father had used it to settle a dispute that couldn't be settled with words. Vincent set it on the desk and stared at it. This object that represented everything he was trying to leave behind and everything he might need to become again. His phone rang. Michael. Dad, they called. They're releasing Danny tomorrow night. 9 p.m. Instructions coming. Vincent checked his watch. That gave him 18 hours. Where? They didn't say yet, but Dad, they sounded different, more relaxed, like they actually believe you're done. Good, Vincent said. That's what we want them to believe. So we just wait. No, Vincent said. We don't wait, we move first. He explained the plan. Told Michael about the fish processing plant, about the team, about the extractions scheduled for 11 p.m. that night, 2 hours after the Russians had promised to release Danny anyway. Michael listened in silence. When Vincent finished, his son said, You're risking his life because you can't stand to let them win. I'm risking his life because men who take children don't keep promises. They're releasing him because they think I'm neutered. But the second they don't need him anymore, he becomes a liability. You don't know that. Vincent's voice went hard. I know exactly that. I've lived in this world for 40 years. You prosecute criminals. I was one, trust me. The line was quiet for 10 seconds. Then Michael said, What do you need from me? Just one thing, Vincent said. When this is over, when Danny's safe, I need you to let the FBI do their job. Don't protect me. Don't interfere. Let justice happen. Michael's voice cracked. You're asking me to help put you in prison. I'm asking you to do what you've always done. Uphold the law, even when it costs you something. Dad. I made choices, Michael. Bad ones for a long time. I'm trying to make better ones now. But I can't undo the past. I can only pay for it. Promise me. Michael promised, and Vincent heard his son crying, and felt something in his chest that wasn't his failing heart, but something older and more fundamental. The understanding that love sometimes meant accepting consequences you'd spent your life avoiding. At 10:45 p.m., a white panel van pulled up 3 blocks from the fish processing plant in Revere Beach. 4 men got out, dressed in black, faces covered, carrying equipment that looked tactical but wasn't weapons. Marcus and Patrick headed for the power junction. Yusuf and Frank moved toward the loading dock entrance. Vincent sat in the van with communications equipment and a police scanner and enough adrenaline to kill a man with a healthier heart. He could hear everything through earpieces, could see nothing, was as helpless as he'd been since the day Danny was taken. Marcus's voice came through. Power cut in 3, 2, 1. The lights in the processing plant went dark. Through the windshield, Vincent saw windows go black. Smoke out, Patrick said. Vincent waited. Seconds became hours. His heart monitor beeped its concern about his elevated pulse. He ignored it. Frank's voice, basement level, multiple rooms, searching. More silence. Vincent counted his heartbeats, got to 27. Got him, Yusuf said. Southeast corner, kids awake, unharmed. Vincent exhaled. Then Frank's voice, urgent, contact. 1 hostile armed, blocking exit. Vincent's hand moved to the revolver in his jacket pocket. He opened the van door. A voice in his earpiece, Yusuf, stay in the van, boss. Vincent ignored it and moved toward the building, his breath coming short, his left arm tingling in a way that meant his heart was deciding whether to cooperate or quit. He reached the loading dock entrance and pulled the door open. Inside was darkness and smoke, and the smell of old fish and concrete. He could hear voices, tense negotiation, 2 men talking in the careful way that meant both were armed and neither wanted to be the first to admit it. Vincent moved through the smoke toward the voices and found them in a corridor lit by emergency lighting. Dmitry Volkov, 6'2", former Russian Special Forces, holding an automatic pistol with professional ease. Facing him was Frank, unarmed, but standing between Dmitry and the room where Yusuf was with Danny. Vincent stepped into the light. Both men turned. Vincent Castellano, Dmitry said. He had the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as an adult but spoke it better than most natives. I've heard stories. Old Lion still has teeth. Vincent kept his hands visible. Let the boy go. Your contract was with Sal. Sal's finished. FBI has everything. He'll be in cuffs by morning. Dmitry's eyebrow raised slightly. That was news. Vincent could see it register. The Russian was calculating now, reassessing his position in real time. Professional courtesy, Dmitry said carefully. But we were paid up front. We deliver. How much were you paid? 200,000. Vincent did the math. I'll give you 500,000 to walk away, and a favor in the future. Dmitry's eyes moved from Vincent to Frank to the darkness where Danny waited. He was calculating. Vincent could see it. Former Spetsnaz didn't live this long by making emotional decisions. The math was simple. 200,000 already paid. 500,000 offered. That was 300 profit for walking away from a contract that was already compromised. And if the FBI truly had Sal, which Vincent's confidence suggested they did, then staying became liability instead of professionalism. The Bratva didn't pay pensions to soldiers who got caught in American organized crime wars. Vincent was offering him an exit that looked like business instead of retreat. The distant sound of sirens grew louder. Police or fire department didn't matter. Time was running out for everyone in this building. Why would a dying man's favor matter? Dmitri finally asked. Vincent met his eyes, because I'm not dead yet. And when I settle my accounts, I remember who helped. You're a professional. You understand that contracts have terms. The party who hired you violated the primary term. He lied about FBI involvement. That voids your obligation. Dmitri considered this logic. Vincent was giving him a rational framework to break a contract without losing face. In their world, face mattered more than money sometimes. But money plus face, that was a deal worth taking. For a long moment, the corridor was silent except for the hum of emergency lights and the sirens getting closer. Dmitri lowered his weapon. Deal, but you pay now, cash. Vincent nodded to Frank, who pulled out his phone and made a call. Within 90 seconds, confirmation came through. Transfer complete. Dmitri checked his phone, verified the amount, and smiled the way men smile when business works out better than violence. You're a businessman, Mr. Castellano. In different circumstances, we could have worked together. In different circumstances, Vincent said, I'd still be your enemy. But I respect a man who knows when to walk away. Dmitri holstered his weapon. Your grandson is brave. He did not cry, did not beg. You taught him well. I taught him chess, Vincent said. The rest he figured out himself. Dmitri nodded once, a gesture of respect between professionals, and walked past Vincent into the smoke. His footsteps faded. A door opened and closed. He was gone. Frank moved to the room where Yusuf waited with Danny. Vincent followed, his heart screaming protests that he ignored. Danny sat on a mattress, thin and pale but alive. And when he saw his grandfather, something in his face crumpled the way children's faces do when they've been brave for too long and finally see safety. "Nano," he said, and Vincent crossed the room and pulled his grandson into his arms and felt the boy shake with sobs that had been held back for 2 days. "You're okay," Vincent said. "You're okay now." "I knew you'd come." Vincent held him tighter. "Always, I'll always come." They got Danny out through the loading dock and into the van. Marcus drove while Frank sat in back with Danny wrapped in a blanket. Vincent rode shotgun, his chest aching, his vision spotty, his phone ringing with Michael's number. He answered, "We've got him, he's safe." Michael's sob of relief carried through the speaker. "Where are you?" "Coming to you, 20 minutes. Vincent hung up and looked back at his grandson, who'd stopped crying and was staring out the window at Boston passing by like he was seeing it for the first time. "Danny," Vincent said, "the men who took you, did they say why?" Danny met his grandfather's eyes. "They said someone wanted you to retire, someone close, someone you trusted." Vincent nodded. "And you figured out who?" "Sal Marino," Danny said. "It was in the newspaper, you stepped down. He took over, that's what they wanted." "You're a smart kid." "You taught me, Nano. Everything's connected. Every piece has a purpose." Vincent smiled despite the pain in his chest. "So what piece am I now?" Danny thought about it. The king who sacrificed himself to save the game. "Close," Vincent said, "but not quite. I'm the king who learned that winning isn't the same as surviving." They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when they pulled up to Michael's house, there was his son running down the driveway. There was Sarah right behind him. There was Danny stumbling out of the van into his parents' arms. Vincent watched the reunion from the passenger seat, too exhausted to move, too content to care. This was what mattered, this moment, this family, this small piece of grace in a life that had too little of it. Frank touched his shoulder. "Boss, you all right?" Vincent realized he was crying. "Yeah, I'm all right." Michael looked up from holding his son and met Vincent's eyes across the driveway. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Vincent nodded once, then told Marcus to drive. As they pulled away, Vincent looked back and saw his family standing together in the light from the porch, and understood that he'd just performed his last act as Vincent Castellano, boss of the Castellano crime family. Everything that came next would be Vincent Castellano, grandfather, former criminal, man trying to die with something resembling dignity. His phone buzzed, text from Julia Reeves, tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., FBI raids in Revere and Providence, stay home. Vincent texted back, understood. He closed his eyes and felt his heart struggling, felt the medication doing its inadequate work, felt the weight of 40 years lifting one small piece at a time. Marcus drove through Boston toward Vincent's apartment in the North End, and somewhere behind them, the machinery of justice was preparing to do what Vincent had set in motion: arrests and indictments, and the slow grinding process that turned criminals into convicts. Sal Marino would go to prison. Tony Russo would go to prison. The Russians would be deported or jailed. The Castellano family would dissolve like sugar in water, sweet and deadly and ultimately meaningless. And Vincent Castellano would live long enough to see it happen, or die trying, which was the only choice he had left. The city lights blurred past the window. Frank sat quiet. Marcus drove steady. And in the darkness of the van, Vincent Castellano allowed himself one moment of peace before the reckoning came. 6 a.m. came to Boston like judgment, gray and cold and inevitable. Vincent Castellano stood at his apartment window watching the city wake to a morning that would rewrite the map of organized crime in New England. 3 blocks away, FBI tactical teams were suiting up. In Providence, more teams. In Revere, agents with warrants and battering rams, and the absolute certainty that comes from having a case built on evidence that couldn't be questioned, because it came from the criminals themselves. Vincent had given them everything: photographs, financial records, meeting locations, names and dates, and the kind of detail that turned suspicion into convictions. He'd spent 40 years building an empire, and 3 days dismantling it with the precision of a man who knew exactly where the supporting walls were because he'd placed them himself. His phone buzzed, text from Julia Reeves, "It's happening, stay off the streets." Vincent texted back a single word, understood. He turned from the window and looked at his apartment, this space that had been his fortress and was now just rooms with furniture, meaningless without the power that had made them matter. On his desk sat 3 envelopes, each addressed in his careful handwriting. One for Michael, one for Danny, one for Frank. Letters he'd written during the sleepless hours after Danny came home, words he'd chosen with the care of a man who understood that last words were the only ones that survived you. His heart monitor beeped its steady complaint about his elevated pulse. He swallowed pills that were supposed to keep him alive and wondered if he wanted them to succeed. The phone rang, Michael's number. "Dad, where are you?" "Home, watching the sunrise." "They're raiding Sal's house. It's on the news. FBI everywhere." Vincent had expected this, had orchestrated it, but hearing confirmation still felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. "Good." Michael's voice dropped. "They're saying you cooperated, that you gave them everything." "I did." The silence on the line was the kind that precedes either forgiveness or permanent fracture. "Why?" Michael finally asked. "Because Danny's safe. Because you kept your family. Because I'm 60 years old and tired of being afraid. Take your pick." "They'll kill you for this. The families, the people you betrayed." "Probably, but I'd rather die a rat than live knowing I let betrayal stand. Some mathematics don't balance any other way." Michael was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, I'm proud of you." Vincent felt something in his chest that wasn't his failing heart. "Don't be proud yet. Being proud of me means accepting what I did to earn it." "I accept it," Michael said. "All of it. The good and the bad and the complicated parts in between." Vincent closed his eyes. "Thank you." He hung up and sat in his apartment and waited for the reckoning to find him. Sal Marino woke to the sound of his front door being destroyed by men with badges and body armor, and the kind of anger that comes from knowing you've been hunting someone for years and finally have them cornered. He was in handcuffs before he fully understood he wasn't dreaming. His wife screamed. His children cried. The FBI read him rights he'd heard 1,000 times on television and never imagined would apply to him. In the back of the FBI van, Sal sat across from Julia Reeves, who looked at him with the satisfied expression of a chess player who just said checkmate. "You're done," she said. "Kidnapping, racketeering, conspiracy. We've got financial records showing payments to the Bratva. We've got surveillance photos. We've got testimony from Vincent Castellano himself." Sal's face went white. Vincent testified. "Signed affidavit, detailed your entire operation. The coup, the kidnapping, your partnership with Tony Russo and the Russians. It's over, Mr. Marino." Sal leaned back against the van wall. That old bastard, he actually did it. Turned rat. "He turned grandfather," Julia corrected. "There's a difference. He chose his blood over his crown. Most men in your position should be so lucky." In Providence, Tony Russo was arrested in his hospital bed, where lung cancer had finally forced him to admit he needed treatment he'd been refusing for pride. The FBI agents were almost gentle with him, understanding that this man would probably die in custody before trial, which was its own kind of justice. Tony looked at the agent reading his rights and laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Vincent Castellano," he said. 40 years I knew him. Never thought he had it in him." "Had what?" the agent asked. "The guts to do the right thing." In Revere, Dmitry Volkov was already gone, having left the country 18 hours earlier on a flight to Moscow that the FBI tracked, but didn't stop, because sometimes you let the small fish swim to catch the sharks. Dmitry had kept his word, had taken Vincent's money and disappeared, which made him one of the only men in this story who could claim any kind of honor. By 9 a.m., the arrests were complete. 8 captains, 15 soldiers, 2 bosses. The entire infrastructure of the Castellano crime family and its allies mapped and dismantled like a building being demolished floor by floor. Vincent watched it on television with Frank sitting beside him, neither man speaking, both understanding that they were watching the end of something that had started long before either of them was born. "Your father would be proud," Frank said quietly. "My father would call me a traitor and order my execution." Frank considered this. Maybe, but he'd be wrong. You saved a child. Everything else is just details. Vincent turned off the television. The silence in his apartment was profound, the kind of quiet that follows explosions. "What happens now?" he asked. Frank pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a text from Julia Reeves. "You and Frank, noon today, Federal Plaza, testimony." Vincent nodded, and after. Frank shrugged. "You go to prison, I go to prison. We play chess and wait to die. Could be worse." "Could be," Vincent agreed. At 11:30, Vincent Castellano put on his best suit, the charcoal one he'd worn to his father's funeral, and his son's law school graduation, and every important moment that required him to look like the man he wanted to be instead of the man he was. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw his father's eyes staring back, disappointed and resigned and maybe, just maybe, understanding. Frank drove them to Federal Plaza through streets that felt different now, like Boston had already forgotten Vincent existed and moved on to whatever came next. They parked in the underground garage, took an elevator to the 14th floor, walked past doors with names of agents who'd spent careers chasing men like them. Julia Reeves met them in a conference room that smelled of coffee and old documents. She gestured to chairs and they sat. "Before we begin," she said, "I need you to understand what happens next. You testify against Sal Marino, Tony Russo, and their associates. In exchange, the U.S. attorney will recommend reduced sentences. But you're both going to prison. That's not negotiable." "How long?" Frank asked. "Vincent, probably 8 years, eligible for parole in 5. Frank, probably 6, out in 4. Vincent did the math. He'd be 63 when he walked out if he lived that long. His heart would probably quit before then, which meant he'd die in a federal prison wearing orange instead of Armani. "Acceptable," Vincent said. Julia slid papers across the table. "Sign here. Initial here. This is your formal cooperation agreement." Vincent signed his name with the same pen he'd used to order things that would haunt him forever. Frank signed next to him. 2 men who'd spent their lives in shadows, now stepping into fluorescent light that was neither kind nor forgiving. The testimony took 4 hours. Vincent detailed everything: the structure of the family, the operations, the specific crimes he'd witnessed or ordered, the conversation with Sal about succession, the photographs Frank had taken, the kidnapping. All of it laid out with the precision of a man who'd spent decades remembering details because forgetting could get you killed. When it was over, Julia stood. "Thank you, Mr. Castellano. You've done more damage to organized crime in Boston in 1 day than we've managed in 20 years. "I didn't do it for you," Vincent said. "I know. You did it for a 12-year-old boy. That's the only reason I'm not celebrating." Vincent stood, feeling every one of his 58 years. "When do I surrender?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring a bag, medication, books if you read. It'll be a while before you see the outside again." Vincent nodded and walked out with Frank behind him. In the elevator, neither man spoke. In the car, silence. At Vincent's apartment, Frank finally said, "You going to see Michael and Danny before?" Vincent had thought about this, had imagined walking into his son's house and saying goodbye to his grandson and trying to explain why Nana was going away for a long time. He'd played out a dozen versions of that conversation in his mind, and none of them ended well. "No," Vincent said, "better if I just disappear. Let them remember me as the grandfather who saved Danny, not the criminal going to prison." Frank didn't argue. He knew Vincent well enough to understand that some decisions were made from pain, not logic, and that arguing wouldn't change them. "You want company tonight?" Frank asked. Vincent shook his head. "I've got letters to write." Frank gripped his shoulder once, hard, the way men who don't know how to say "I love you" settle for physical contact that means the same thing. "See you tomorrow, boss." "Not boss anymore," Vincent said. "Just Vincent." Frank smiled. "You'll always be boss to me." After Frank left, Vincent sat at his desk and looked at the 3 envelopes he'd already written. Then he pulled out a 4th sheet of paper and began writing a letter he'd been composing in his head for 40 years. "To whoever finds this," he wrote, "my name is Vincent Castellano. I was born in Boston in 1968 to a father who ran numbers and a mother who pretended not to know. I became what my father was, and my father became what his father was, and somewhere in that chain of inheritance, we lost the ability to imagine being anything else. I hurt people. I gave orders that resulted in deaths. I took money that wasn't mine and built power on fear and called it success. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just stating facts so that whoever reads this understands that I knew what I was and chose it anyway, until the day my grandson got taken and I understood that some choices echo louder than others. The hardest part isn't the guilt. It's knowing that I could have been different and wasn't. That I had moments when I could have walked away and didn't. That I built my life on codes and honor and rules that were just prettier names for violence. But I did one thing right. I saved a child. And maybe that doesn't balance the ledger, but it's something. It's the only thing that matters anymore. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Good. That means I don't have to carry this weight anymore. That means someone else gets to decide what my life meant, and I hope they're kinder in their judgment than I deserve. Tell my son I'm sorry. Tell my grandson I loved him. Tell anyone else the truth, which is that I was a criminal who died trying to be a man, and the trying matters more than the success. Vincent Castellano. October 2026. He sealed the letter and added it to the pile. Then he took his medication, ate a small dinner he didn't taste, sat by the window and watched Boston move through its evening, millions of people living lives that didn't include him, didn't need him, would continue just fine when he was gone. At midnight, his phone rang. Michael's number. Vincent almost didn't answer, but some instinct made him pick up. "Dad," Michael said, "I know you're surrendering tomorrow." Vincent closed his eyes. "Yeah. We're coming. Sarah and Danny and me. We're going to be there." "You don't have to." "Yes, we do. You're family, and family shows up. You taught me that, even if you taught me badly." Vincent felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. "Thank you." Danny wants to say something. There was fumbling, then his grandson's voice, small and serious. "No. Hey, Danny boy. Dad says you're going away for a while." "Yeah, I did some bad things. I have to pay for them." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Will you be okay?" "I'll be fine. Prison's not so bad. They have libraries. I can read, maybe teach some chess." "Will I be able to visit?" Vincent's voice cracked. "If you want to." "I want to. You're my nano. That doesn't change." "No," Vincent said. "That doesn't change." After they hung up, Vincent sat in the darkness and felt something like peace, which was strange because peace had never been part of his vocabulary before. He'd spent 40 years chasing power and respect and the illusion of safety. And here at the end, he'd found that none of it mattered as much as a 12-year-old boy saying "no" in a voice that held no judgment. He slept fitfully and woke at 6 a.m. to his last sunrise as a free man. He showered. Dressed in the clothes he'd laid out the night before, simple and dignified. Packed a bag with medication and 3 books and photographs of his family. Left the envelopes on his desk where Frank would find them. At 8:30, Frank picked him up. They drove to Federal Plaza in silence that was comfortable instead of heavy. At 8:55, Vincent walked into the FBI field office and saw his family waiting. Michael in a suit, looking like the prosecutor he was. Sarah beside him, hand on his arm. And Danny, 12 years old, wearing his school uniform because it was Thursday and he'd insisted on coming before class. Vincent stopped, looked at them, understood that this moment mattered more than any throne he'd ever occupied. Danny broke away from his parents and ran to Vincent and hugged him with the unself-conscious affection of children who haven't learned, yet that love is supposed to be complicated. Vincent held his grandson and smelled his shampoo and felt his small heart beating and thought, This is what I fought for. This is what I'm paying for. This moment right here." "Be good," Vincent said. "Listen to your parents. Study hard. Be better than me." "I'll try," Danny said. "But you set the bar pretty low, Nano." Vincent laughed, surprised. Michael must have told him that joke. Smart kid. Julia Reeves appeared with 2 federal marshals. "It's time," she said quietly. Vincent released Danny and walked to his son. They looked at each other, these two men connected by blood and separated by choices and reunited by crisis. Michael spoke first. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I know I said it yesterday, but I need you to hear it again. You did the right thing." Took me 60 years to figure out what that was. Better late than never. Vincent almost made a joke about that being his epitaph, but settled for pulling his son into a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected. Sarah stepped forward and kissed Vincent's cheek. "Thank you for bringing him home." Vincent nodded, not trusting his voice. The marshals stepped forward with restraints. Vincent held out his wrists and felt the metal close around them, cold and final. They led him toward the elevator that would take him down to a van, that would take him to a processing facility, that would take him to a prison whose name he didn't know yet. At the elevator, Vincent turned back. His family stood together, Sarah's arm around Danny, Michael's hand on his son's shoulder. 3 generations, 2 of them free, 1 of them about to be locked away. Vincent smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was genuine, the expression of a man who'd found something worth losing everything for. The elevator doors closed. 3 months later, Vincent Castellano sat in the visiting room of FCI Devens, a medium-security federal prison 40 miles west of Boston. He wore khaki instead of Armani. His hair had gone grayer. His face had thinned. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years, like prison had burned away something he'd been carrying too long. The door opened and Danny walked in with Michael behind him. It was Saturday, visiting day, the 3rd one they'd made the drive for. Danny carried a chess set. They sat at a metal table bolted to the floor. Guards watched from corners. Other inmates visited with other families, conversations happening in low tones all around them. "Hey, Nano," Danny said. "Hey, Danny boy, how's school?" "Good. I got an A on my history paper, about the Roman Empire." "What you write about?" "How it fell, all the reasons. Corruption and overexpansion and losing sight of what made them strong in the first place." Vincent smiled. "Sounds familiar." Danny set up the chessboard. "Your move first." Vincent moved his king's pawn forward 2 spaces. "How's your dad?" Michael answered, "Busy, prosecuting the cases you gave us. Sal's trial starts next month." He paused, and Vincent saw something in his son's expression. "What?" Vincent asked. "Tony died last week, lung cancer." Vincent absorbed this. Tony Russo. 50 years he'd known that man. They'd stolen their first car together at 16, a Buick LeSabre they'd joyridden for 3 hours before abandoning it in Quincy with the tank empty and their hearts full. Had stood as best man at each other's weddings before the families split them into rivals. Had spent decades on opposite sides of territory lines, always circling, always competing, never quite killing each other because some part of them remembered being boys who didn't know what they'd become. He remembered Tony at 20, skinny and hungry, and convinced the world owed him something. Tony at 30, harder, angrier, building his own crew in Providence while Vincent rose in Boston. Tony at 50, sick even then but pretending otherwise, too proud to admit weakness. And now Tony was dead in a prison hospital, his last words probably a nurse's name instead of anything that mattered. In their world, that counted as mercy. Better than dying alone in a basement with a bag over your head, the way so many of their generation had gone. "I'm sorry," Vincent said and meant it. "Me too," Michael said. "He was a bastard, but he was our bastard." He paused again, pulled out his phone. "Do you want to know his last words?" Vincent looked up, surprised. Michael showed him a text from Julia Reeves. According to the nurse, Tony said, "Tell Vinny he won. The old bastard finally did something right." Vincent felt his chest tighten. That was the closest thing to forgiveness their world allowed. Tony Russo, who'd hated him for 40 years, who'd helped orchestrate his grandson's kidnapping, who'd died bitter and alone, had used his last breath to acknowledge that Vincent had chosen correctly. That had cost Tony something, Vincent knew. Pride was the last thing men like them gave up, usually only when the alternative was breathing. He would have made a good legitimate businessman, Vincent said quietly. Tony, he had the brains for it, just not the patience. Michael nodded, maybe in another life. Maybe, Vincent agreed, though he didn't believe in other lives, only this one, with all its permanent choices and irreversible consequences. They played chess for an hour. Danny won 2 games. Vincent won 1. They talked about school and the Red Sox and what Sarah was cooking for Sunday dinner. They didn't talk about the empire that had dissolved, about the 50 men who'd been indicted, about the power structure that had been dismantled and wouldn't be rebuilt in their lifetimes. They talked about normal things, because that was the only gift Vincent could give them now. When visiting hours ended, Danny hugged his grandfather goodbye. See you next week, Nano. I'll be here, Vincent said, not going anywhere. After they left, Vincent walked back to his cell, an 8x10 space he shared with a tax fraud accountant who'd embezzled $3 million and spent his nights crying quietly. Vincent lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling and counted days until his next visit. 5 years later, Vincent Castellano walked out of FCI Devens at 63 years old, thinner, grayer, slower, but alive in a way that surprised the doctors who'd predicted he'd die in custody. His heart had held on through sheer stubbornness, which seemed appropriate for a man who'd spent his life being too stubborn to quit. Michael picked him up alone. Danny was at West Point now, 17 years old, cadet uniform, future bright in ways Vincent's never was. They'd planned it this way, father and son, to have this moment private. They drove for 20 minutes without speaking. Then Michael pulled into a rest stop and parked. You okay, Dad? Vincent looked at his hands, weathered and scarred and showing every one of their 63 years. Yeah, I'm okay. What do you want to do now? Vincent had thought about this question every day for 5 years, had imagined 100 different answers. Retirement in Florida, consulting work using his experience to help law enforcement, writing a book nobody would publish. But there was only one thing he actually wanted. I want to see my grandson graduate, Vincent said. I want to have dinner with my family. I want to plant tomatoes like my mother used to. I want to be boring. Michael smiled. You'll never be boring. Watch me try. They drove to Michael's house, the same brownstone in Cambridge, and when they walked in, Sarah was cooking something Italian and Danny was home on leave, and the table was set for 4. Danny stood when Vincent entered. He was taller now, broader, wearing his cadet uniform with the kind of pride Vincent had only ever felt when committing crimes. No, Danny said and hugged him. Look at you, Vincent said, man now. Yes, sir, thanks to you. Vincent shook his head. Not me. Your parents, your choices. I just got lucky being related. They ate dinner together, 4 people who'd survived crisis and prison and the dissolution of an empire and come out the other side intact. The conversation was light. The laughter was real. The wine was cheap because Vincent's fortune had been seized and distributed to victims, which seemed fair. After dinner, Vincent and Danny played chess while Michael and Sarah cleaned up. Danny had gotten better. Vincent had gotten older. The game ended in a draw. That's the first time you haven't let me win, Danny said. I'm not letting you do anything. You earned that. Danny reset the board. No, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it, the life you lived? Vincent thought about this question, the same one he'd been asking himself for 5 years. Every day. But I don't regret leaving it. That's the difference. What would you tell your younger self, if you could? Vincent looked at his grandson, this young man who'd chosen service over power, honor over expedience, the harder path over the easier one. I'd tell him that the crown isn't worth the wait. That power is just another word for fear. That the only thing that survives you is how you made people feel, and fear is a terrible legacy. Danny nodded slowly. I'm applying for intelligence services after graduation. CIA or DIA, working on the kind of problems that don't have easy answers. Vincent felt pride and terror in equal measure. That's dangerous work. You taught me to be careful, to think 3 moves ahead, to protect the people who can't protect themselves. I taught you to be a criminal. Danny smiled. No, you taught me to be strategic. I'm just applying it differently. Vincent reached across the board and gripped his grandson's hand. Be better than me. I'm trying, Nano. Every day I'm trying. Later that night, Vincent stood in the small bedroom Michael had prepared for him, looking at the few possessions he owned now. 3 books, a photo album, the chess set Danny had given him, a whole life reduced to what fit in a backpack. His phone buzzed. Text from Frank, who'd gotten out 6 months earlier and was managing a restaurant in the North End. Drinks tomorrow. My treat. Place closed, so just us. Vincent texted back, see you there. He lay down in a bed that wasn't a prison bunk and stared at a ceiling that wasn't concrete and listened to the sounds of a family living normal lives in rooms nearby. Sarah washing dishes. Michael watching news. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Sounds he'd never appreciated when he had power because power made you deaf to anything that wasn't threat or opportunity. He closed his eyes and felt his heart beating its stubborn rhythm and thought about the future, which was something he hadn't allowed himself to do in prison. Danny graduating West Point. Michael making partner at a law firm. Maybe grandchildren someday, though that seemed like hoping for too much. And Vincent himself, old man on parole, teaching chess at a community center, growing vegetables in a backyard garden, boring himself to death in the most wonderful way possible. The next afternoon, Vincent met Frank at Salvador's restaurant, the same place where they'd held commission meetings and planned operations and divided territories. It was different now, quieter, half empty in the 3 p.m. dead zone between lunch and dinner. Frank looked older too, his remaining hair completely white, his face more lined. But his eyes held the same sharpness, the same intelligence that had kept both of them alive longer than statistics suggested they should have lasted. They sat in a booth in the back. Frank poured wine from a bottle that probably cost more than Vincent's parole officer made in a week. To survival, Frank said, raising his glass. To survival, Vincent echoed. They drank in silence for a while. Then Frank said, you hear about the North End. What about it? New crew moving in, young kids, Russians and Albanians, no code, no respect, just violence and money. Vincent absorbed this, so it starts again. Always does. Nature abhors a vacuum, we left one. Someone's filling it. Not our problem anymore. Frank smiled. No, not our problem. Which is the best part of being old and retired and powerless. We don't have to fix it. Vincent looked around the restaurant, seeing ghosts in every corner. His father negotiating deals, his grandfather holding court, himself, younger, believing that power meant something beyond the ability to hurt people who couldn't hurt you back. You ever regret it? Vincent asked. The whole thing. Frank thought about this every day, and never, we were who we were, we did what we did. Can't change it now, can only live with it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer we get. They finished the bottle and talked about small things. Frank's restaurant, Vincent's parole requirements, the Red Sox season that was already looking like a disaster. Old men talking about old things because the future belonged to other people now. When they parted ways on the sidewalk outside, Frank gripped Vincent's shoulder. "You did good, boss. Saving Danny, testifying, taking responsibility. That took more guts than anything we did before." Vincent shook his head. "It took getting old and scared. That's different from guts." "No," Frank said. "That's exactly what guts is, being scared and doing it anyway." Vincent walked home through streets he'd once controlled, and nobody recognized him, which was the kindest gift Boston had ever given him. He was invisible now, anonymous, just another old man in a city full of them. At a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, he stood next to a young mother with a stroller. The baby inside was maybe 6 months old, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the world and all its complications. The woman saw Vincent looking and smiled. They're peaceful when they're sleeping. Vincent smiled back. Enjoy it while it lasts. The light changed. They crossed. The woman went her direction. Vincent went his. Two strangers sharing a moment that meant nothing and everything. That night, Vincent sat in Michael's backyard with a cup of coffee and watched the sun set over Cambridge. His heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. His medications sat on the table beside him, small pills that were supposed to keep him alive, and for the first time in years, he actually wanted them to succeed. Michael came out and sat beside him. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent considered lying, then decided he'd done enough of that for one lifetime. "I'm thinking that I wasted 40 years being afraid. And now that I'm not afraid anymore, I don't have enough years left to enjoy it." Michael was quiet for a moment. "You've got some years, make them count." "How do you make years count when you're 63 and broke and forbidden from associating with anyone you knew for half your life?" Michael smiled. "You teach, you help, you show up for the people who still want you around. You be the grandfather Danny deserves, you try." Vincent looked at his son. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between hating you and understanding you. That's a lot of distance to cover. Builds character." They sat together as darkness fell, and the city lit up with lights that represented lives being lived, choices being made, futures being built. Vincent thought about all the lights he'd extinguished over the years, all the futures he'd stolen, all the families he'd destroyed in service of power that turned out to be nothing but air and ego. He couldn't undo those things, couldn't apologize meaningfully enough, couldn't balance a ledger written in blood with anything except time and humility and the slow, patient work of being better today than yesterday. It wasn't redemption. Redemption was too big a word for what he had. It was just effort, just showing up every day and trying not to make things worse, just being a grandfather instead of a boss, just teaching chess instead of strategy, just planting tomatoes instead of fear. Small things, quiet things, things that wouldn't make history or headlines or difference to anyone except the handful of people who still loved him despite everything. But maybe that was enough. Maybe surviving wasn't about power or respect or leaving a legacy. Maybe it was about finding one person who'd hug you despite knowing exactly who you were, and holding on to that moment like it was the crown you'd spent your whole life chasing. Vincent Castellano had been a boss, a criminal, a man who'd commanded fear and respect in equal measure. He'd built an empire and watched it crumble. He'd saved a child and destroyed a dynasty. And now, sitting in a backyard in Cambridge with his son beside him and his grandson at West Point, and his heart beating its stubborn rhythm against all odds, he was just a grandfather. Just Vincent. Just a man trying to earn forgiveness he'd never fully receive, from people he'd never fully deserve, for crimes that would outlive him. But trying anyway. Because in the end, the trying was the only crown worth wearing. And the weight of it was different now. Lighter. Almost bearable. Almost enough. I've narrated hundreds of stories, but Vincent Castellano's choice still haunts me. At 58, dying of heart disease, he could have walked away quietly. Instead, he chose prison to save one child. Here's what gets me. Most men spend their lives building empires. Vincent spent his last years dismantling one. That takes a different kind of strength. What would you do? Protect your throne or protect your blood? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if this story made you think twice about legacy, hit subscribe. More morally complex tales coming your way.